Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another pre-concert talk here at the Brit Festival. Yeah. Wanted to take a moment to thank the SOU Faculty Brass Quintet again for playing. They did a lovely job. Thank you. And without further ado, I will bring our guests on stage today. We have Eric Teel from JPR, and he'll be talking with Harrison Hollingsworth, a bassoonist and violinist, and Johnny Tessier, the clarinetist, both of the Sixth Floor Trio. So welcome to the stage.
Hello again, familiar faces. Thanks for coming. You're coming back. I must be doing something right. I have to say, this will be my last pre-concert conversation for the season. Next week, I believe next Friday night, Jeff Riley, the host of the Jefferson Exchange, will be out here for a conversation. And on closing night, our own Don Matthews will be out for the final night. So a couple of different personalities from the station out here for some conversations, and hopefully a little bit different insight and less irreverence than you get from me, perhaps. Tonight, has anybody grabbed the program for tonight and opened it up, by the way? There is rumor that there's an insert in it, because back when the big glossies were printed, they didn't have information on what these guys were actually going to play tonight. So has that been inserted? Okay, all right. Because we're going to talk a little bit about what these guys are going to play, but as always, we'll go off in a couple of different directions. So to my immediate left is Johnny Tessier. Harrison Hollingsworth is to my far left. Two of 3 or 4 members of the Sixth Floor Trio. How does that actually work? Because there are often 4 of you.
Math isn't our strong suit. The Sixth Floor Trio was actually born of a desire several of us who lived together on the 6th floor of 220 South 16th at the Curtis Institute of Music, loved playing music together. Gabe, who is the 4th member of the trio, so to speak, was a percussionist who lived with Johnny, and I lived with Teddy. And in our initial years, the 3 of us without Gabe came together and crafted a lot of repertoire based on various diverse styles of music. And Gabe was not around, he was doing some other things. A few years later, we collaborated together, and it was electric. And ever since, he's been kind of the unofficial 4th member. We don't always play with him or travel with him, but we do whenever we can.
Let's talk a little bit about Curtis Institute. This is in Philadelphia, correct? Mm-hmm. And it's education not only for performers, but all different aspects of music, correct? I mean, you can learn conducting, you can learn the music business a bit, certainly performance in a lot of different styles of music.
Yeah, it's a very small school, very prestigious school. I could say it's apparently statistically the hardest school to get into of any subject, right? So it's about 160 students or so, I think. And it's been very classically oriented, actually. But sort of among our peers while we were studying there were so many musicians, young musicians, who were interested in all different styles. And I mean, a great musician is a great musician. So
what do you do to be accepted?
You do an audition.
Yeah.
They have
before a judging panel of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Well, let's talk about the multi-influences. You know, as you just mentioned, most great musicians are influenced by a great many things that they hear and are exposed to. And as these folks and all of the folks up on the main hill that didn't come over will experience a little bit later tonight, there are a lot of different things that you guys do, and they weren't necessarily immediately the core of the education at Curtis. So are these the kinds of things that happen because you guys have proximity to one another in the apartments and things like that? It's a late night jam session kind of stuff?
Exactly. That's exactly right. I can say for me, what I brought to the table when I came to Curtis was I was a classical bassoon player, but I grew up in Texas and had always had an interest in fiddle-based music, especially Western swing. And then when I got to Philly, bluegrass and old-time fiddle music. And Teddy, growing up, classical pianist, classical clarinetist, but loved and played a lot of klezmer music. And so we all brought these various interests and expertises to some degree to the table as we were forming our repertoire. And we actually, as a trio, didn't really form our repertoire until after we graduated. So in a sense, it was an effort to keep our community together. Hey, we love each other, we have to keep each other together, let's play some music together and we'll figure out how we're going to do it.
Yeah, and the way it started in a way was a bit philosophical even, because my background is very classical, and I didn't have any background in improvisation or anything when I was growing up, really. Very solid classical background. But, you know, all these musicians, we all love different kinds of music, and so this is sort of the idea we hit on. We were getting back together the summer after we graduated, and you know, just hanging out with great friends, and we wanted to play music together. Why not play all the music that we like? You know, there are all these other kinds of music that we don't get to play just because it's not classical, and so we just tried playing some things, and it was really fun, and it worked. It worked really well, pretty quickly, I think.
So with the other styles of music, do you manage to be able to get your hands on sheet music? I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, improv, that kind of thing of just extemporizing was not necessarily your background. And when you move from more formally structured classical music on the written page to fiddle tunes, which
Right.
are generally passed down orally, or klezmer music, which has a lot of improv in it, where do you start? How do you get started in that? By just a melody that you kind of know to work up, or do you actually have material to work from?
I think at first we did start with kind of arrangements that were existing. So, for instance, our very first gig was playing an event for a Jewish association in the high country of North Carolina, and so we got these arrangements of klezmer music. There was a keyboard part, a violin part, and clarinet part. Perfect. So it was more, you know, adapting to the style, but not necessarily having to figure out, you know, how to learn from ear or that sort of thing. Later on, especially even as we had composed our own music, we learned a lot of things by ear. We learned how to improvise. We learned how to read lead sheets, which is where you have a melody and chords, but no written out parts per se, and you improvise your part within the chord. So definitely a lot of memorization and a lot of listening.
Yeah, and it took a lot of time, I think. The first few arrangements we did, we would spend hours and hours doing this one fiddle tune over and over and arguing about the form and saying this section should go this way, and we would just spend so much time. And now, I mean, just seeing how much we've changed now, when we put something together new, we do it pretty quickly now, it seems like.
We put together a tune of mine for a concert we did on Wednesday in about half an hour.
An hour and a half before the concert.
Over the years, I've had some amazing opportunities to talk to fantastic classical performers and also fantastic performers from that American string music tradition, including just last night with Aoife O'Donovan and Jeremy Kittle, who were here. And one concept that has come up often when talking about the differences and similarities is that for a piece of music, a tune that's written in 4, there are many ways to get to 4. What's really important is getting to 4, but there are different ways to do it where the 4 beats might not all be divvied up exactly the same. We can talk about swinging or not swinging. Not a lot of classical musicians can swing.
Well, we'll see tonight. We're actually going to play a Benny Goodman favorite, Sing, Sing, Sing. And you guys can tell us afterwards if we swung or not.
I think you have to in that, don't you?
Hopefully.
Let's talk a little bit about instrumentation for Sixth Floor Trio, because while you play multiple things, at its core, it's sort of bassoon, clarinet, and clarinet with Teddy, right? Clarinet and piano.
He mostly piano. There's a couple of things that Teddy, you'll see him play clarinet tonight, but mostly it's on the piano.
So does that, to a degree, I would imagine that instrumentation motivates or educates the kinds of things that you gravitate toward wanting to play.
You'd think so, but we tend to make just about anything work with that instrumentation.
We try to make the instruments gravitate toward the style that we want.
Nice.
To varying degrees of success, but
Well, you referenced jazz, you referenced klezmer, Irish. What else have you pulled into your repertoire?
we have a few arrangements of some rock music that might have influenced Teddy's piece that you guys will hear tonight, which is called Rock. And yeah, I mean, it is very unusual to play these styles of music on these instruments, with a bassoon playing rock music or even a clarinet playing bluegrass, I find. And I had to find some sort of new sounds of what I can do just to make it work. And
I will say, I think that whenever we're approaching a genre that's atypical for instrumentation, what I'll often do is I'll think, well, what am I trying to simulate, or what am I trying to play with? A lot of times when we play rock music or pop music, on the bassoon, I think of myself as the lead singer, which is a nice change from what the bassoon typically gets to do. And then, Johnny, I don't know if you think of a similar thing for playing clarinet in bluegrass music.
I'm the lead singer.
Perfect. That's great. That's great.
Well, Johnny, you mentioned the idea of creating new sounds, and I know from my own experience many years ago as a youngster learning classical instruction that at least in elementary level, sometimes you're not encouraged to do a ton of experimentation because they're literally just trying to herd the cats and get everybody on the same page and make some sounds that are pleasing. But when you get to a higher level and you have the technical proficiency and the general understanding of music to be able to start to expand and create your own sound and move your own instrument, whatever it might be, in new directions, what kinds of things do you do to take the clarinet from the clarinet we all know to creating some different sounds and things that you can do on it?
I mean, it's an incredibly flexible instrument, and I did some listening. I listened to some of the great klezmer clarinetists, and it's just unbelievable what these guys can do, bending the pitch, and it just sounds like a voice, like somebody crying or screaming or laughing, or so there are a lot of possibilities just in pitch bend, and it is a very versatile instrument.
Will we hear some of that tonight? I mean, just to give people a
Yeah,
moment to listen for,
more or less. Yeah, of course. We're doing the klezmer tune, and Teddy will go wild for sure.
Yeah.
A program that you guys have been involved in, it was grant funded, if I recall, is called Random Acts of Culture. What is this program? What did you guys do?
It's exactly what it sounds like. We would pull up in a minivan to a random location. We'd pull out our instruments and we'd play a 2-minute tune, and then people would applaud, and then we'd pack up and we'd say, "You've just experienced a random act of culture."
About how many of these did you do?
About 200.
200?
Yeah.
Probably
Over
more.
what period of time?
Over a couple of years.
Yeah, there were 2 separate grants, and then we had like 2 different trips that were built around it. But the idea for the initial grant was from the Knight Foundation, which is anchored in certain cities. And so we would visit these cities, and it was almost like a type of cultural exchange, where Knight said, "We want you to infuse happiness culture into this city." And so we went to various locations that were open to it, and where there would be a lot of foot traffic, and we did that.
What
Yeah,
was the
and
response like?
I mean, across the board, we had some. We had a few experiences where we played and nobody actually paid any attention to us. But then others we had where, it's a group of people starts coming and just grows and grows and grows, and people were throwing $20 bills at us, even though we say, "Wait, no, don't give us money. We have a grant for this." So really across, but I feel like we learned a lot actually about just performing and connecting with people, because they don't have to stop to listen.
Nope.
These people, they don't know who you are, and they just hear the sounds, and they can stop to listen or not. And so I felt like I learned a lot about performing and engaging people, and also playing in a way that catches people's attention.
How did you decide where you were going to stop?
That's a good question. Typically, we would set out a route and we would build it around other gigs. But a lot of times, if we're approaching a city, we're about an hour away, we'd start looking up, popular restaurant locations, and we'd call them. We'd say, "Hey, would you like to hear a random act of culture?" Click. But sometimes they would be like, "Tell us more." And we had an amazing experience in Kansas City, actually, where the famous barbecue place there, Oklahoma Joe's, and they have a cultural liaison who's a writer, and we sent him an email, and within 20 minutes he said, "Guys, I want you here. Get here right now." And so we went. It was some people just got it, and some people didn't quite as much get it.
Did you stick around? I mean, you mentioned that you performed and then you packed up and left. Did you stick around long enough? Was there an educational aspect of it? Were you trying to spread information about who you guys were or anything like that?
Not as much. I mean, part of the idea behind the random act of culture is that you don't want to present any ulterior motive.
It's almost like a flash mob kind of thing, right? You
Yeah,
show up,
it's-
you do it, you're gone, and then
yeah,
people
and-
buzz about it, not knowing what the heck just happened.
Sort of, and the idea is sort of to catch people in a moment when they don't expect to hear music, and sort of put this idea in their minds, and if you reach enough people, these little ideas can add up to something significant, I think. Hopefully.
Was there a feedback mechanism, maybe through the back end, through the funding website, where you guys ended up hearing back from more than you experienced when you were just there?
So one thing we would do, we had little bookmarks that had our information on it, and if people took videos or did an audio recording, we would encourage them to post on social media and tag us. So that was kind of the way we did the engagement with kind of a permanent record, so to speak.
Is that a program that might continue?
We still do, even though there's no funding, we still do random acts of culture wherever we go, just because we like to do it.
I'm not sure if the Knight Foundation is continued this. I think their idea was to put this idea down, and they did it, and now other organizations can go
It's
with
cool.
it.
It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, it was really
probably
fun.
really fun. I mean, there's a very famous video online of, I think, Joshua Bell playing in a subway station where he just wanted to see if anybody would notice that, A, it was him, and most don't. Were you playing in, I mean, you mentioned the barbecue restaurant. Did you play in places that might have been predisposed to enjoy the kind of music that you were going to perform, or did you intentionally go to, like, the drive-through of a fast food restaurant, or the middle of like a convenience store parking lot?
Part of the idea was to make sure that you're going to get some foot traffic. So a lot of times we would be in an outside location, and it was fairly loud, and we'd play a fast tune to grab attention. But one time I remember we did a random act of culture in a library, and we had to choose music that was a little different, and it was I remember actually Teddy played the clarinet, not the piano, and it was beautiful polyphony from the 16th century, and it was definitely a transportative experience for those people who were there. And we placed ourselves a little farther away so it wasn't too loud if people didn't want to engage. That was a very different random act of culture.
Any places that you guys set up to perform where you weren't well received and maybe needed to skedaddle?
We tried playing in a gas station. We actually didn't ask them. We just pulled out and ran out of the car and started playing. And the owner ran out immediately with his phone, and he says, "Get out, I'm calling the police." So we just ran back into our van and drove out.
No kidding.
Yep.
Oh.
Those experiences were pretty rare. I called those what did I call those? It was like unplanned random acts of like super random. And sometimes one time we were playing in a public area, but we crossed a threshold which was not marked into a private area, and the security guards escorted us 10 feet over to make sure we were on public land and not the private land.
Well, we all know much of Teddy's other activities. Teddy, of course, being the trio member that's not out here. But what kinds of things are you guys involved in when you're not representing Sixth Floor Trio?
So my main job, I actually live in Sweden, in Malmö, Sweden, south of Sweden, where I play with the Malmö Symphony. So that's my main job.
Principal
clarinetist
and
there.
Also some conducting work?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I thought I'd read that. What about you?
I'm the principal bassoonist of the New York City Ballet. So I live in New York, and I'm also music director, conductor at a church in Manhattan, and up until recently, I was also a conductor at the New York Youth Symphony. And I freelance around. There's a lot of different things to do in New York City, but some of my favorite work to do, and the one that I get to travel for the most, is playing with the Sixth Floor Trio.
You have debuted some commissioned work, new work for bassoon. I know a piece that Teddy has written, in fact.
Yes, I'm a big fan of new music.
What is the role for you and for other bassoonists that rise to prominence, technically proficient?
Relatively speaking.
Relatively speaking. Of championing new music and giving these pieces an opportunity to be heard in front of an audience?
I think it's absolutely integral. I mean, when you look at what I would call the odd instruments in the orchestra, viola, bassoon, double bass to some degree, there's always room, I think, for development, not just of the repertoire, but of the instrument itself. So even though I'm not only a bassoonist, I have a lot of different musical hats. As a bassoonist, I'm trying to expand and amplify what the bassoon can do and what it can be thought of, which is why it's so valuable for me to think of myself in different roles when I play other styles of music. Teddy's piece, by the way, the sonata for bassoon and piano, he wrote for me for my 21st birthday. And it's also very rock-oriented. And I've probably played it 30 times, and I never get tired of playing it. And audiences really respond well. So yeah, I'm all about, making the bassoon more prominent in people's eyes.
Yeah, and looking historically for the clarinet anyways, a lot of our really big repertoire was inspired by a performer, by a clarinetist. All of Mozart's pieces were he wrote for his friend Anton Stadler. Brahms wrote all of his pieces late in life, actually came back from retirement of composing and was so inspired by this clarinetist to write 2 sonatas, a quintet, and a trio. Benny Goodman, a lot of pieces were written for him. The Copland Concerto, Hindemith wrote a concerto. Bartók also wrote for him. So yeah, I think the role of a performer can also be to inspire, and and get some great new music out of today's composers.
Moving to Sweden couldn't have been more convenient for the Sixth Floor Trio. How do you keep up with all the engagements with you guys living all over the place now?
It's really tricky to manage the schedules. We've managed pretty well the last few years. Next season is a bit tough for
and
scheduling.
I guess, and geography is one thing, but you also have all of these other jobs and other gigs and other performances. The
And
calendar must be a nightmare.
Teddy is quite busy also, you can imagine, I'm sure.
Before I let you guys go, I want to talk a little bit about personalities of the trio, because we're going to see you together making music, but undoubtedly each one of you brings your own unique aspect to the trio. And we have seen Teddy on stage, we've seen him speak, we've seen his personality. What do the two of you bring to the trio? What are your roles?
That's a good question.
Non-musical roles.
I might get in trouble for this.
Good. Go with that.
If you were to think of us as a trio of personalities, or a trio of roles, I think of myself as the prophet, and I think of Johnny as the priest, and I think of Teddy as the king.
Ooh.
And what I mean by that is,
I've never heard that one before.
I'm pretty verbal, and Gabe also plays this role a lot. I'll push a lot whenever the trio we have ideas and we're trying to create something. At least historically, I was kind of the person who would push against and have an alternative. Johnny, in my opinion, again, interested in what you think, was always of the utmost perfection in the way that he related to us and the way he brought us together. And Teddy was a ruler. Teddy was someone who said, this is how it ought to be. And he had both the intelligence and the will to carry it out. So that's my 2 cents.
What do you think?
Good answer, Harrison.
Johnny, you've been here for, you said, a better part of a week? Just
Yeah,
about? Last Tuesday,
I've
something
been
like
here.
that?
I played last week in the orchestra, and this week.
What do you think of this experience? I mean, you
Oh,
said
it's
this
beautiful,
is
and
your first
I
time,
was
right?
here also last summer for the opening week. It's such a gorgeous space, and it's really exciting to see what Teddy's doing here for me. I don't think there's any other festival like this with programs like this, and it's really amazing. And it's a beautiful setting to enjoy the concerts when there's no smoke.
And Harrison, you just got here
Tuesday
as well.
Yeah.
And this is, you said before we came up here, this is really your first time in between the sort of Napa Valley and Portland area, right?
That's exactly right. Or maybe more accurately, my first time between Napa and Willamette. Or Willamette. but I love Applegate. I love it.
And you have some recreational activities planned before you jet out of here, correct?
Yes, I'm going to go. I already visited 2 wineries, and I'm probably going to go visit 2 tomorrow before I go back to New York.
Recommendations, you can send them to him. Okay, so you are playing the Benny Goodman. You're playing a piece called Rock. You're playing a klezmer piece. The fourth is...
It's a fiddle tune, actually written not too far from here by a fiddler and a composer in Northern California. It's called Cazadero.
Fantastic. Any last words you'd like to share with everybody?
Hope you enjoyed the concert.
Well, guys, thanks for coming and
pleasure.
being my guests up here on stage tonight. I hope you enjoyed our conversations. As I mentioned at the top, for those of you who wandered in mid-conversation, this is my last of 4 this season. Next week, Jeff Riley and Don Matthews will take over the chair with some fantastic conversations to wrap up the season. I appreciate all of you coming out. I appreciate all of you supporting classical music. This is by no means the pop music of 2015, and you folks are at the core of the folks that are learning and sharing and spreading the word about all of the wonderful things that have happened in the past in the classical music world and everything that's happening now and will happen. So thank you all for coming out and supporting Brit and supporting our pre-concert conversations. I really mean that. Thank you very much. Thank you.